Hello again, Metas, and welcome back to the channel. Today I want to show you my Little Jaws build using the new Saviour armor set meta. While it does lose a little bit of maximum DPS compared to the treacherous armor meta, in this guide you'll see just how effective the Saviour set can be, not only for survivability but also putting out big damage regardless of your choice of deviant or secondary. So sit back, relax, and I hope you enjoy. So let's take a look at Little Jaws and how the gun functions. When hitting enemies, you'll trigger Unstable Bomber with a 0.9 second cooldown, dealing 40% damage against metahumans. The gun naturally has a 0.2 second delay from the moment you trigger the Unstable Bomber explosion to when it actually detonates. This detail is important and ties into why we use a specific armor set piece in the build. Next, when hitting enemies already affected by a previous Unstable Bomber blast, your next Unstable Bomber blast will gain an additional 20% damage. In short, you're stacking an extra 20% Unstable Bomber damage on top of your baseline output. And finally, for every 0.1 seconds of Unstable Bomber delay, you gain a further 15% Unstable Bomber damage. Since the gun has a standard 0.2 second delay, this trait gives you a natural 30% damage boost, while the secondary trait further extends the synergy. Next up is Calibration, and for this build you only really have one option, and that is heavy style with a double elemental suffix. Running this setup lets you trigger more Unstable Bomber blasts per magazine, which directly increases your overall damage output. It also pairs perfectly with the mod we'll be using, which is Bombardier Souvenir, making the synergy even stronger. For my accessories, I'm running the multi-brake for the muzzle, compact reflex sight for optics, elite vertical grip for my tactics, and a weighted SMG mag to further increase the ammo count, which synergizes nicely with both the Calibration style and Bombardier Souvenir. For ammo, I'm using blasting SMG AP, which rounds out the build with some solid stats: a total stability of 42, accuracy of 56, range of 28, and a reload speed of 56. Next, let's take a look at some secondaries to pair with this weapon. I personally prefer two options, and the first is the DE50 Wildfire. This weapon is extremely useful for applying bullseye to multiple targets and is quick and easy to use. It has a 60% chance to trigger bullseye when hitting the target, with an 80% chance to spread the effect to one or more enemies within a 15-meter radius, when striking already marked targets. If no enemies are available within that radius, you instead gain a 25% weapon damage for 10 seconds. On top of that, when hitting the weak spot of marked enemies, you gain plus 3% attack for 10 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. For the Calibration, you will want to use a rapid shot style with double weak spot damage, as we want to be aiming for the weak spots to gain maximum buffs from the secondary. For my accessories, I like to run assault brake for the muzzle, compact reflex sight for my optics, and an integrated laser sight for my tactics. Then I run extended pistol mag. For my ammunition, I use tungsten AP, which can really boost the performance of this gun. Altogether, this setup gives a total stability of 53, accuracy of 100, range of 43, and a reload speed of 60. For your second option, you have the Gulp Law, and with this gun you can stack up an absolutely insane amount of Unstable Bomber damage. It does come with some risks, but once you've learned how to implement it properly, it becomes incredibly powerful. I recommend using this as your secondary if you're running with a team or if you're very comfortable managing kills on your own. For solo play, the DE50 is easier and a safer choice. Now let's break down the Gulp Law and what it does. It has a 30% chance to trigger Unstable Bomber on hit, which increases to 90% when hitting a weak spot. Each enemy defeated reduces Unstable Bomber range by 10% and grants plus 20% damage for 30 seconds. This means you can stack it up to 100%. Finally, its last trait guarantees that Unstable Bomber will always deal a critical hit. On top of that, for every 1% weak spot damage you have, you'll also gain plus 1% Unstable Bomber damage, allowing the potential for ridiculous scaling. For my Calibration, I have chose to use the rapid shot style to aid with fire rate with a double weak spot. I chose weak spot damage to aid with the last trait of the Gulp Law. For my melee weapon, I've chosen the Kukuri knife for the extra psi intensity and its strong buff synergy. Since destroying a sticky ice cube counts as defeating an enemy, we're able to trigger both Kukuri buffs with just a single heavy strike. The first buff is defeating a target grants all weapons plus 30% attack and plus 15 crit rate for 10 seconds. The second trait, which is the main reason we use this weapon in an elemental build, is that defeating an enemy with a heavy strike increases psi intensity by 20% and restores HP equal to 200% of your psi intensity. This makes the Kukuri a strong offensive choice. Next, let's take a look at some damage testing with different deviants, buffs, and secondary weapons. So during my raw damage, the gun hit an impressive 129,000 DPS with a total of 710,000. With Bullseye applied, my DPS jumps to 155,000 with a total damage of 892,000. Next up is 5 stacks of Gulp Law, and with this secondary I hit a highest DPS of 171,000 and a total of 995,000. So now let's take a look at the fully buff testing, which each involved 3 full mags, starting with the DE50 and Shattered Maiden. When fully buffed, gives me a highest DPS of 589,291 and a grand total damage of 7,596,351. Next, we had the DE50, and this time I'm using the Lone Wolf Whisper. I would be using this deviant for silo speed runs and areas where I want to use the dog to control the room. This playstyle allows for much more of a calculated approach. My highest DPS is 495,977, with a total DPS of 5,509,090. Finally, we had the big DPS style, which is to use the Gulp Law and get a full 5 stacks for that 100% unstable bomber damage. To get this, you can use the ice cubes or just mop up some ads that have low health to gain this buff. When fully buffed, you will want to run the surprise spring roll as your second option for your food choice. My highest DPS was 713,300 and a total damage of 9,400,036. Next is my Cradle. Feel free to pause to check out what perks I'm running. I just want to take a quick moment to say a huge thank you to all my subscribers, both old and new. I honestly can't thank you enough for all the support and feedback. You've helped me grow this channel past 1,000 subscribers, and that's truly amazing. If you haven't yet subscribed, but you're enjoying my content, maybe consider hitting that subscribe button, dropping a comment, or smashing that like button and ringing the bell, so you don't miss out on any more of my Once Human guides. With that being said, let's jump back in. For food buffs and drinks, you'll want to make sure that you have the Mimic Chef Gourmand and Ice Treat Brain Freeze. Always prepare your buffs with a level 5 chef, since that's the best way to maximize their effectiveness. If you're running Little Jaws with a D50 as your secondary, then for drinks you'll want to take Whimsical Drink, which grants 42% status damage when made with the Mimic and Chef, and Starry Bubble Tea, which provides extra shield. You can also swap in Lunar Gummies as another solid option. For food, I recommend Mixed Fried Hot Dog, which gives 27% against enemies affected by Bullseye, and Popcorn, which boosts your unstable bomber damage by plus 13%. Together, these buffs push this build damage and survivability even further. Now, if you're chosen to run the Gulp Law as your secondary, the only change you'll need to make is with your food selection. Instead of making a mixed fried hot dog, you'll want to use Surprise Spring Roll, which provides a buff of between 6 to 20% elemental damage. I recommend making a stack of these ahead of time, because if you roll the lowest buff, you can simply eat another one and try again for the stronger effect. Next on the list is the deviants. So your main deviant for DPS and single target will be the Shattered Maiden. I have a level 4, which will increase my blast damage by 70%. The Shattered Maiden will autonomously move and attack, and it inflicts a slowdown and chain to non-boss enemies in front of it. When attacking, it also increases their explosive damage received by 70%. If you have a level 5, then this will be increased up to 80%. For the second option of Deviant would be the good old trusty Lone Wolf Whisper. Not only does this Deviant excel at making enemies aggro to him and not to you, it also makes the enemy he attacks receive 50% extra weapon damage, which is always a bonus. For armor, you will want to run a 3-2 split. The core of this build is a new Saver set, which provides the backbone of your setup. Pair this with 2 pieces of Treacherous set to gain an extra 12% weapon and status damage, giving you a solid offense boost right out of the gate. The most important armor piece in this setup is the Explosive Top. This piece extends the delay of your unstable bomber blast by 0.3 seconds, bringing the total delay up to 0.5 seconds. That added delay directly translates into a significant increase in damage. With the explosive tops equipped, you gain an extra 75% unstable bomber damage from the extended delay, plus another 30% unstable bomber damage from the item's bonus, stacking together for a total of 105 damage before factoring in other buffs. Once you add in external multipliers, things start to get crazy. With the 5 stacks of Gulp Law, you gain another 100% boost, bringing your overall increase to roughly 205 unstable bomber damage. Add deviants into the mix and food buffs, and you're stacking an absurd amount of damage on top of an already overpowered explosion. So now let's talk about mods. So for the little jaws, I like to run Bombardier Souvenir with the unstable bomber suffix. When triggering unstable bomber, automatically refill 10% of your magazine, with the aptitude effects of unstable bomber damage plus 6%, damage against great ones of 2.4, blast damage of 3.6, and status damage reduction of 6%. For my secondary to D50, I've chosen Vulnerability Amplifier with the Bullseye suffix. The Bullseye adds vulnerability plus 8% with the aptitude effects of weak spot damage on targets with the Bullseye plus 12%, weapon damage reduction plus 6%, damage against normal enemies plus 4%, and damage against elite enemies plus 4.5%. From the Gulp Law, I've decided to go with Supercharged with the Unstable Bomber. Triggering Unstable Bomber grants Unstable Bomber damage plus 5% for 3 seconds. Effects can stack up to 6 times, with the aptitude effects of unstable bomber damage 4.8%, damage against elite enemies plus 6%, head damage reduction plus 1.6%, and blast damage plus 6%. For my helmet mod, I'm running Deviations Expert with the Lunar suffix, with the aptitude effects of max HP plus 3.6%, the lower your HP the higher your elemental damage up to 16%, the lower your HP, the higher your status damage up to 9.6%, and damage against great ones of 3.6%. For my mask, I'm running Delayed Blast with the Unstable Bomber suffix. Before the bomb explodes, for every 4 hits taken, the bomb's final damage plus 25%, with the aptitude effects of Unstable Bomber damage plus 4.8%, damage against normal enemies plus 8%, max HP plus 2.4%, and blast damage of 6%. This ties and works really well with the way that the delay works on the chest piece. For your chest piece, you should run Rejuvenating with the Lunar suffix. When shield is above 30% of max HP, defeating an enemy recovers 20% of max HP. Excess recovery is converted into shield lasting 20 seconds with a 10-second cooldown, with the aptitude effects of the lower your HP, the higher your status damage up to 12%, the lower your HP, the higher your elemental damage up to 9.6%, damage against great ones of 6%, with a max HP plus 3.6%. For my legs mod, I'm using Elemental Resonance, but with the Downstar suffix. For each instance of elemental damage dealt from the previous magazine, the next magazine gains elemental damage plus 1% for 15 seconds upon reloading, up to 24%. This isn't the best mod, but it's the best one that I have. Aptitude effects. Status damage plus 6% increased up to by 3% against enemies standing at a lower level than yourself. Elemental damage plus 6.4% increased up to by 3.2%. Damage against elite enemies plus 4.5%, and weapon damage reduction of 3.6%. For my gloves mod, I'm running Elemental Overload with the new Crescent suffix. Elemental damage plus 18%, with the aptitude effects of damage against great ones plus 2.4%, status damage plus 4% with an extra 6% damage based on shield that triggers at 40%. Status damage reduction and elemental damage plus 5% with an extra 8% damage based on shield triggers at 40%. And with the Saviour set constantly giving us higher shields, we get maximum buffs from these perks. And last but not least, Rush Hour with the Downstar suffix for my shoes. Every 10% HP loss grants plus 4% melee, weapon, and status damage, with the aptitude effects of elemental damage plus 8% increased by up to 4% against enemies standing at a lower level than yourself, head damage reduction plus 4.8%, status damage plus 4.8% increased up to 2.4%, and damage against great ones plus 3.6%. And that brings us to the end of my Once Human Little Jaws Saviour build. I hope you have enjoyed going through it, and maybe even picked up a few ideas for your own setup. I want to give a massive thank you to everyone who stuck around until the very end. Your support means a lot. Until next time, Mares, stay explosive.